Women always have cared for the sick and always will. Our sympathy with suffering, quickness with perception, aptitude for the duties of the sick room render us peculiarly adapted to the demands of the healing arts. Let us have medical knowledge corresponding with our native abilities, and we will excel. This was our argument in the mid-19th century to admit women to the nation's leading medical colleges. It was not an easy road, but we made our dream a reality. Oh, good evening. My name is Sarah Pierce Emerson, and I was Honolulu's first female licensed physician. I was born September 22nd, 1855 in Fall River, Massachusetts, the second daughter of Abraham Wilcox Pierce and Harriet Dufee Pierce. My father was a well-respected ship captain who spent most of his adult life sailing from New Bedford to the Pacific in his hunt for whales. Oh, as lifeblood of the East Coast economy for years. The whaling industry demanded that sailors take to the oceans for lengthy periods of time in order to maximize their profits. It was a lonely and solitary business, particularly for family men. And as a result, the mid-1850s saw the beginnings of a new and strange kind of family life. It became respectable for sailors to take their wives and even their children to sea. My father was quick to load us on board, and in 1857, I was only a year and a half, I underwent my first sea voyage on the whaling bark Emerald. We spent many sea voyages together to the Sandwich Islands until the profit in the whaling industry declined. You see, whale oil had been one of the world's chief sources for lighting and lubrication, until in the late 1850s saw a sharp increase in the production of petroleum and the value of whale oil decreased. Oh, and then the Confederate ship Shenandoah virtually destroyed New England's whaling fleet during the Civil War. Lucky for us, we were not one of her victims. Soon after, though, my father converted his sea-going assets into land-based ones, and we moved into our home in Honolulu in 1870 when I was 15 years old. Now, my father was particularly fascinated with herbal medicines in Hawaii, and I have fond memories of him hunched over, excitedly devouring some medical journal. I attended Punahou, and though it was uncommon for young women to continue education in adulthood, I applied to Boston Medical School, something only a handful of women even attempted, and even fewer graduated. Well, can you imagine? My presence aroused such an outcry among the male students and staff, I was forced to withdraw after 2 weeks. I refused to give up, and after becoming one of the top students of Boston University's liberal arts program, I re-enrolled in medical college 2 years later, and in 1875 I graduated with my MD and entered the strange world of a female physician. Well, I've often been asked, what on earth would motivate a woman to enter the medical profession? Some women in a similar position may have at once replied, my object is to gain money by looking after sick people. Well, it is true. Women find such difficulty in honestly supporting themselves that money can be reason enough to enter the field. But I say emphatically that anyone who makes monetary gain their chief motive to enter the medical field is an unworthy student and not fit to become a doctor. No, I believe a physician, particularly a woman, should be driven by a moral motive. First, we must understand what special contributions women can make to the medical field. The great essential fact of women's nature is the spiritual power of maternity. It is the subordination of self to the welfare of others, the joy of creation, the bestowal of life, and our unmatched pity and sympathy, which tend to make every woman the born foe of cruelty and injustice. Women are called upon to judge all action as right or wrong, and to exercise this moral influence in whichever direction it can be most powerfully exerted. This morality will guide our intellectual endeavors, and there is no line of practical work so suited to these noble aspirations than to the legitimate study and practice of medicine. The true physician must possess the essential qualities of maternity. The sick are as helpless in her hands as the infant. Well, as was customary for new physicians, I spent several years after graduation studying my craft further in Leipzig, Paris. I focused particularly on gynecology and pediatrics and opened a successful practice in 1878 in New York City. It was during this time I met a charming gentleman, Nathaniel Bright Emerson. He was about to give up his practice to return to his birthplace, Honolulu, at the request of the Board of Health. Well, I was sad to see him go and sincerely hoped our paths would cross again. Let me tell you about Dr. Emerson. He was the son of missionaries, the Reverend John S. Emerson and Ursula Newell Emerson. He grew up mainly in Wailua, Oahu, where his mother and father were stationed, preaching, doctoring, teaching agricultural methods. Well, you may know their church today is the Queen Liliuokalani Protestant Church in Haleiwa. Yes! Well, our paths did cross again. Not accidentally. I elected to return with my sister Harriet to live in our old family home in Honolulu, and Dr. Emerson and I became, oh, how shall I say, reacquainted. And before long we were married, January 22nd, 1885. Now in 1883, I had been licensed by the Kingdom's Board of Health and became the first female physician in the Sandwich Islands. I opened my practice specializing in the treatment of women and children in our home on School Street. Well, you may ask, why did I not push to become a respected surgeon or aid in the treatment of the contagious maladies like tuberculosis or leprosy? Well, I firmly believe that the Department of Medicine we women can most nobly devote our energies is to the guardianship of the rising generation, which is the especial privilege of the family physician. Now, the introduction of the female doctor in the 19th century also helped solve a number of troubling medical and social issues. You see, it struck one as strange that the profession termed midwifery, a feminine occupation as the name implies, was exclusively in the hands of males. As days gone by, it was common practice for women to make a living as midwife. But as time progressed and humanity became more concerned with scientific and intellectual practices, midwifery became the job of only the most highly educated medical practitioners. Now, you must understand the relationship between the sexes in the 1800s, and incredibly delicate. As women, it was necessary for us to comport ourselves as the pure moral core of society. And this became difficult when only men were employed in the delicate task of treating feminine issues. It was not uncommon for a woman in town to take ill with a case that at its beginning was of light and trifling importance, and to find herself ultimately in an untimely grave. Everyone who is acquainted with the subject must be aware of the great inconvenience and unnecessary suffering, mental and physical, resulted from confining this knowledge and qualifications to male physicians. Women would shudder and feel a sickening sense of horror at the thought of what they would have to go through at the hands of their male physicians. My practice provided women recourse from such feelings of shame, related to many who relate their enormous relief. One woman in town tells me she would turn the other way on the street or slip out a back door whenever she saw her family physician coming because she felt such repugnance at meeting him. In 1887, Nathaniel and I were blessed with our first and only child, Arthur Emerson. And I elected to give up my practice in order to care for my child. I fear I would have been a terrible hypocrite if I hadn't. It did, however, give me opportunity to turn a beloved hobby of mine into a nearly full-time pursuit. You see, Nathaniel and I had become acquainted with the Hawaiian Islands at a young age, and we found them fascinating. We recognize the importance of preserving and interpreting Hawaii's past, and so together we delved deeply into the lore of the islands. We focused particularly on the hula and its various chants. Nathaniel presented several dissertations to the public accompanying performances of the hula in an attempt to abolish the old missionary idea that these dances were dirty and profane. I was so proud when the Smithsonian Institution's American Bureau of Ethnology agreed to publish my husband's book in 1909. We titled it Unwritten Literature of Hawaii, the Sacred Songs of the Hula. Perhaps you're familiar with it. You should be. We worked for years collecting and translating information on hula. There'd been nothing else like it before we labored to save these old songs and dances. Well, though I no longer had time to practice medicine, my accomplishments had not gone unnoticed by the Public Health Service. And so I made time for certain civic duties. See, in 1866, the government had opened the Oahu Insane Asylum. Prior to that time, the mentally afflicted were simply sent to prison to mingle with prisoners and felons of all kinds. They were not regarded as ill, but as dangerous and locked away from the presence of the public. The asylum provided these people with sensitivity to the nature of their illnesses and specialized care. I was appointed to the visiting committee to the insane asylum in 1893 with two gentlemen, and it became our duty to regularly tour the facility and submit a report as to its quality and condition. Happy to inform you that we rarely had anything negative to say. The patients who could were permitted to exercise and labor 4 to 5 hours daily, and all had the freedom to wander the grounds as they liked. It may perhaps be said that the insane asylum was one of the most satisfactory institutions under control of government in recording to its results produced in economical administrations. Tragedy struck in 1915. Nathaniel suffered a sudden heart attack on a steamer en route to San Francisco. He passed hundreds of miles from me and not in the comfort of his own home as I'd always imagined. I remained living with our son Arthur, who had since become a prominent artist in town. Oh, he grew to an excellent young man. He was never too busy for his old mother. In my final years, I continued to participate in civic organizations. I served as one of the founders of the Women's Auxiliary to the Outrigger Canoe Club, and I was an active and energetic member of the League of Women Voters. If a woman could become a physician, she should be able to vote as well. These hobbies kept me quite content until I passed in 1938, the age of 83. Now, the appropriateness of women entering the medical profession is no longer a matter of debate. The fact is settled beyond cavil that women can be educated in medical college and can succeed in medical practice. The intense prejudice which first met with the idea of the female doctor is melted away. But in order to finally establish the female physician in the confidence of society, her education must be thorough, her business capacities and tact unquestionable, and her manners excellent. She should not insist upon her position by insisting upon the rights of women, or to thrust herself upon the notice of the public, but simply by succeeding in the treatment of the sick placed in her hands. I feel an overwhelming sense of pride with the good work I did with my time here on Earth. Stand by my decision. I hope there are young ladies in the crowd who will heed my story this evening. If I could do it then, you can certainly do it today. I must go now. Farewell.